Welcome back to Angry Bike Mechanic. I'm going to show you how to bleed guide brakes, and here's the caliper. I'm going to show you the bleed on the bike since we just did a video of a bleed off the bike. This is the guide series that came out right after it was the trail series. So the only thing that changed really was the brake lever itself. The caliper is the older style, and you'll see that. We'll get into it, and please give this a thumbs up so it can climb through the ratings. It really does help the video. That way more people discover it when they want to bleed their brakes.
All right, what you're going to need for this is the box wrench or open wrench, 8mm and 10mm. You'll see why. The Avid or Sram .5.1 hydraulic fluid, the T10 Torx, the 2.5 hex key, the Sram bleed kit, and a bleed block, which is the red thing that I call a caliper block in the video.
First, I always like to clean it up. You know, right now I'm actually pumping the brakes, and you can see that caliper piston is uneven, and it came out. So use rubbing alcohol to kind of spray that, and then I take Q-tips and I start wiping these. And now, you know, if you can, go across and do it on all of the pistons. That will help you a lot. If these start sticking really bad, you'll need to rebuild them. And you'll need to rebuild them with, as in pull the caliper apart and get the pistons out of there and rebuild them with this dot grease. And that should help a lot. Otherwise, you can get new seals and rebuild kits for these calipers. So what I do next to push that caliper back, reset the caliper, to push the piston back in, and I'll actually use, this is a 10mm, and I'll push this and I'll gently push that piston back in. And you'll actually feel like kind of it passes a rib, or almost like it pops. Push that all the way in and test all of them to make sure that they're all the way back in, because this caliper has to have that feel on each piston, or else it's not fully reset and you'll have lots of trouble with dragging brake pads. The caliper block for this one is this little guy, the super weird one, and you put it in from the top at an angle, snap it in place. That's that. As far as bleeding it, what you need to do is grab some paper towel or something. Prep your syringes. I'm assuming you've already done that, so I'm not going to show you how to prep your syringes. I attach the full one to the bottom, so I want to send fresh fluid up. We're going to go through and just give it a full shot bleed and prep it the way a brake's supposed to be prepped. And so I'm actually drawing a little bit of fluid up just to make sure there's no bubbles. And you can see that there's no bubbles. So just going to cycle that a little bit. I can see dirty fluid coming up though. So I'm going to push that and let it sit. We're going to, again, grab a paper towel to catch any excess fluid. And I use my 10mm driver, or T10 driver, sorry. Which haphazardly is the size of a 3mm. Set that aside. Don't lose your bleed port cap. And put your syringe on. Now you may have the pro syringes, which is pretty cool. Those seem to be a whole lot nicer. I've got a set of those waiting. So, and then I'll pump this. I'll actually pull and push, just to make sure. So now it's going to seem pretty straightforward. Oh yeah, we got some dark fluid with some bubbles. That's not great. Let's get those bubbles out of there. And I am not going to send that fluid back in. Oh wow. I'm going to pump the lever a bit. You don't believe like how nasty a fluid will come out after you've pumped the lever. So create that vacuum and just draw. Now I'm actually pushing the rear caliper syringe just to reset the pressure. I'm going to detach my syringe from the front brake or from the rear brake lever, and we're going to drain this. We'll put fresh fluid in the lever syringe and then push that down towards the caliper. A bit of fresh fluid in there just so I can push and draw as needed. Okay, look at that. It's actually, oh, still filthy. So all you need to know what's happening on the back is the caliper is free. And I bottomed out the caliper syringe, which has no air in it, so that's good. I'm just going to pump right now. And what that does is actually sends fluid down the line and pushes the fluid back into the syringe down at the caliper. Draw and push. And basically the idea is to extract as much air from my system as I can before I put new fluid in the top. Use a paper towel to catch that. So that's pretty hazardous to your health. All right, so I'm actually reattaching my syringe with some fresh fluid down here at the bottom, down at the caliper. I'm going to flush some more fresh fluid up. And what I'm going to do in order to facilitate a little bit of a vacuum here and get any extra air out of the line is I'm going to draw or pull the brake lever, and that actually closes the line from the top. I'm just going to pull any air out from my connection here. There's really not a lot of air in that fluid, as you can see. And I'm actually going to flex the lever a little bit here. You can see that cloudy fluid working its way into the clean fluid in the syringe. And I'm just going to push more through. And since I know that this has no air in it anymore, I'm going to articulate the caliper a little bit. Being able to remove the caliper around will give you an advantage in your bleed. Try not to bleed it on the bike. That's a poor quality bleed. So, well, that feels pretty good. So what I'm going to do is test my results by plugging up the caliper here and make sure that there's fluid kind of coming up and out. And some dripping fluid, more than I wanted to. Get that nice and snug. This is why you always bleed with a bleed block, and take the pads out so you get the proper spacing. If the pads are in there and you don't have the spacing right, you'll have an overabundance of fluid, and the brake won't work the way it's supposed to, especially if you got to replace the pads between bleeds. So I'm going to actuate the lever because you need to set the pistons. Feels really good. Drawing a little air out of there still. Let's do that. Seems like you're always going to pull air out of the guide brakes or out of any of these Avid. But the good thing is, because it's a vacuum, you can do it. So continue to draw air out if you can. Now, some people try to do a bleed like this exclusively. This really doesn't do a whole lot for you unless you're pulling fresh fluid through the line. Now, you technically should probably do this first, because this will help you expand some of the air pockets that might be in the brake. And you go ahead and press the lever, draw out some air. For now, though, things are looking pretty good, and you get the idea. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the video and keep working on this brake. Going to catch my excess fluid here. You can see that was the effect of the bladder. Okay, again, make sure you depress your lever. Put your fitting back in. Sometimes if those O-rings are kind of chewed up, it's a good idea to replace them. And come back with your rubbing alcohol. Technically, you can use water. I've always used alcohol. But if you leave that fluid on there, it will start to decompose the paint. And the paint will come off. It'll be pretty obvious. All right, so that's the brake bleed for the SRAM brakes. Whether you're using the bleeding edge or this thread-in system at the caliper, it's all virtually the same. How you pump the brakes, how you bleed it, and sometimes how long it takes to take the caliper off the bike. If you can take the brake system off the bike like I did with this front one, you get a pretty good quality bleed out of it. So, Angry Bike Mechanic, please like and please subscribe and please share this with your biking buddies.